Angela. Welcome to the show today. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you
You
so much
are
for
the
having me.
author of the Real Girl's Guide to Midlife. And all the things your mama never told you would be my tagline for that, because you and so many women like you, we have had to learn it experientially because nobody wrote the book for us. And so now you have a guidebook and now a workbook recently out that helps. And one of the things that you framed is this idea of radical self-possession. And all of our conditioning of the 80s and 90s was radical self-acceptance. Can you tease out the difference for us?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk with you. And the way I sort of view the difference is, radical self-possession is about understanding and appreciating that the things that we need, the things that we want, the things that we want to create in our lives have to come first. And I think for a lot of us, especially women in midlife and being raised in the 60s and 70s, is we were sort of taught and conditioned to put others first. And I know I certainly lived a lot of that. And it wasn't until what I viewed as my most change-filled decade so far, which was my 40s, that I realized I'm doing no good to anybody if my needs are not being met. It's kind of the proverbial, when you get on a plane, whose mask are you supposed to put on first? They tell you that.
Yeah.
I do think that there is an element of acceptance that comes along with a lot of the transitions that we go through, but I don't think it's the starting point. I don't think it's okay, let's just accept everything that we have right now and be grateful. We want to be those things. However, we need to be louder and more bold in what are those things that we want.
Mm-hmm. Well, and for me, it was more of self-acceptance turned out. The self-acceptance of my 40s is not the self-acceptance of the 60s. And it was far more about my lot in life,
Mm.
accepting my role, accepting
Mm-hmm.
why did my life look so good on the outside and feel so crazy on the inside? It must
Mm-hmm.
be that PMS. There must be a pill for this.
Mm.
All the hormonal issues that nobody bothered to research, much less talk about medically.
Absolutely. I think one of the other things, though, that you said that kind of strikes me too is, I know that as I was sort of going through my 30s and my 40s and feeling a lot of those things, why does everything look great on the outside to a point, but why do I feel so unsettled by it? And a lot of the additional self-talk that I think myself and other women, especially women that I spoke to for the Real Girls Guide, is we must be failing. It must be us. And for me, when I think about this book idea, it was actually something that was born in my mid 30s. I had two of my three children at that point. I was at one of several career pivot points, but that was one of the more substantial ones. I was trying to get used to this role as a wife and a mother and a working mother, and I'm looking around, and I was slowly starting to experience some hormonal changes that I didn't even know what was happening to me at that time. Nobody talked about it. This is 20 years ago. And I'm looking around, and the people in my circle, whether it was coworkers or friends, they all seemed to look like shiny and perfect. So for me, the storyline became, okay, well, I must just need to accept where I am and be grateful, because heaven forbid I'm unhappy. That must mean I'm ungrateful, and that's not good. And B, everybody else seems to be doing this right. I must be failing.
Welcome to Facebook and Instagram, the highlight
Jeez.
reel of illusion,
Yeah.
and and where followers became more important than facts or
Yeah.
connections,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And all of that has now gone its wave, and its wave is waning. And
Yep.
now we
Thankfully.
have Substack, where real women of a certain age are talking about real life in real terms.
Yeah.
And people either love me for that or hate me for that. There's no middle ground. And one of the things that good girls don't talk about are mean girls.
Mm-hmm.
The
That's a
haters
really
aren't
good point.
always just the men.
No, they're not. And sometimes they're, I think, the most brutal critics and the most judgment can come from other women. And then, I've been trying to really think about this, through the course of writing the books and writing for my own Substack and talking to people. There's the iceberg effect, right? Where you see this behavior manifest itself. And there's a very clear set of tells, mean girl behavior tells, right? But what's underneath it? And because it's the iceberg, right? So you're seeing the behavior, but there's got to be stuff underneath it. And I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a life coach. I'm just a girl trying to figure all this stuff out and make sense of it. And so when you think about it, what is underneath it? A lot of it, I believe, is insecurity. And when you start to dig into it, some of the most judgment that I certainly felt, and I felt it a lot. When I look back and made changes, decided to, divorce my kid's dad, as one example. I had a lot of people, especially women who I thought were my friends, sort of question my decision instead of supporting me. And, at that time, it kind of rocked me a little bit because it almost like created that doubt, which was, am I doing the right thing? I don't know. I knew I was, but those little voices were just like chirping. But yeah, it's not just the men, it's the women too. And we don't talk about what does, and we kind of romanticize in a way and make it super comical about mean girl behavior, but it's real. And and I always thought we'd age out of it. Right.
Yes. Yep.
And I don't know that we do.
No. No, I think it's like anything else. Somebody used to call it maturity. You'll mature beyond whatever that is, but sometimes you mature into
Right.
whatever that is,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And the unexamined life, if you get into your 40s and your 50s and you don't take that as a wake up call to who you were designed to be or wanted to be, or what, to manage your life differently, post-menstrual versus premenstrual, when you are baby making. If you don't take that, then all those unexamined conditioning responses and comparisons and shaming, and there's nothing worse than a reform smoker. There's nothing worse than somebody who's lost 100 pounds and then looks at everybody else like they're less than because they haven't done it too. It was so easy.
Yeah.
And I know that because I've been that person on both sides of the fence.
Right. Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Unconsciously.
I was just going to say, a lot of us, I think if we're honest with ourselves and real, we could say that and point to times where we've been that person on both sides. And it's not always a conscious decision. And it's not always in the words that you say, but it's in your actions. And, if I take a very critical look, absolutely, I've been on both sides. Yeah.
That shame base, the thing that causes women to compete instead of collaborate or celebrate one another, the thing that causes women to step back when it's going to cost them something. I can be your best supporter as long as it's just you and I talking. But when somebody's looking and now they're going to look at me differently because of an opinion I have or a position I take, all of a sudden the good girl goes silent.
Oh, yeah.
And then you get to deal with the grief
Oh,
or the anger at yourself or somebody else for putting you in that position
yeah.
where you didn't put yourself out there.
Yeah. It's such a spiral. And I think that kind of good girl sort of mindset, if I go back and think about myself, and I saw this threaded through a lot of the stories that women shared in through the course of me writing the Real Girls Guide. A lot of it is rooted from the way we were kind of raised. And it's not just it was something that was ingrained in us or taught to us, it was modeled behavior. And for me personally, one of the things that I realized as I got older was, it wasn't that I set out with this conscious decision to kind of be the good girl and be the people pleaser and be the doormat or whatever you want to call it, right? However, it became something that was a pattern that I established, but I did get something out of it. So if I take the way I showed up at work as one example, I talk about this a lot. Competency became the currency that I traded on. I was very, very competent. I am very competent in a professional setting. And it got me something. So I became the person that teams and leaders and management and execs turned to when things were broken, when they needed to be built, when we were in the middle of either high growth or just tumultuous situations, I became the trusted one. And I like that. I got something out of being the trusted one. So it became the currency that I traded on. And what I realized looking back at some of these periods was it got me things. It didn't get me more money. It didn't get me bigger titles. It gave me more work. But I view, there was that kind of competent view that others had on me. I traded on that. And it
Right.
wasn't even a conscious decision.
Yeah. I love that you said that because it's true that we only do things if there's something in it for us. That's the actual truth. But the more martyred or codependent among us want to claim that we are this self-serving and ultimately victimized person who didn't do anything to deserve, and the moment that you turn that lens back on yourself and say, what was in it for me? What did I gain?
Yeah.
Why did you stay so long in an abusive marriage? I got that a lot. I was 20
Yeah.
years with with an abusive man that I ended up with a permanent restraining order against by the time it was
Right.
done. And why did you stay? Why didn't you leave? As though it's a personal flaw.
Yeah.
Because I had the welfare of the children in mind,
Yeah.
because I know that the most dangerous time is right after you leave,
Yeah.
and bad things happen to good people,
Yeah.
because there were financial considerations, because it was a life, all the moving
Absolutely.
parts, right? And I also know that it takes women on average 7 times to leave an abusive situation before they leave for good. It's the same statistic as stopping smoking, by the way. Addiction is addiction is
Interesting.
addiction.
Yeah.
7
Yeah.
times on average before they quit for good.
Right.
So why didn't you do it sooner? Because I wasn't ready, because there
Because you
was
weren't
still
ready.
something I needed, whether it was, oh, look what a tolerant person she is, or look how much she puts up with, or I got the hero thing at church, or who knew.
Or you had safety concerns, not just for yourself but for your kids. And I do think that it's very easy for people on the outside, to sort of evaluate that. And I just think that when you look at situations like that, I think the same could be true. So let's, like, you fast forward, right? Different scenarios. We're in our 50s and 60s. How many women do you know that are leaving marriages that they've been in for 20, 30, 40 years
Absolutely.
because things aren't working? And you can look at that. And I have been guilty of looking at some of the marriages that maybe now have ended earlier, kind of thinking to myself, why is she not leaving him? Or why is she staying? And that's not the right question, right? Or making it, and then even if for whatever reason a very tender and vulnerable conversation came up, not uncommon, would a response sort of look like something that sounded, well, it's better than being alone.
Ooh.
And again, like, I look at some of these things and it's just, I can sort of carry a big stick to myself and go, I probably asked the wrong questions, and those questions were kind of probably rooted in, I thought, kindness and friendship, but maybe there was a little bit of judgment there too. And like, yeah, I'm not proud of that. But the response, which I think a lot of women, not in your situation but in others, well, it's better than being alone. Or for me, in my case, with the father of my boys, I felt that my boys deserved an intact family. And if it came at the cost of my happiness and my comfort and my future, that's the price I signed up to pay. They didn't sign up for that. I signed up for that. But what I realized was they deserved a happy Angela. They deserved a happy mom and a happy dad. That's what they deserved. So once I sort of got that clear in my head, it made a lot of other decisions clearer. But it's like, sometimes I think we sort of focus on the wrong questions, and not necessarily for always the wrong reasons, but maybe for reasons we don't understand.
Well, and I think people don't leave a situation until the pain of where they are is greater than the fear of where
Yeah.
they're going.
Yeah.
Because the devil you know, or the
Oh.
devil you don't know, whether
Yeah.
it's the job or the food plan or
Yeah.
the
Whatever.
community, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So what do you think happens in the 40s
Mm.
ish? Because that's when the shift begins. At 50, for me, it was almost like a light switch flip. and it
Yeah.
was a now or never. This is the second half of my life.
Yeah.
How do I want it to look?
Right.
And suddenly that veil lifted and didn't come back down, that hormonal veil with menopause. And then I
Yeah.
could be clear all the time, not just 1 week a month.
Yeah, not just 1 week a month. I think it's a good question. So if I go back and think about, my story and then some of the stories that women shared, the 40s are an interesting time, right? For many of us, the hormonal shifts are happening and they're happening at a different pace. And if I go back to my 40s, I didn't realize when I kind of hit my mid 40s into my, kind of 47, that's when I entered menopause. So I ended my 47th year with the, 12 months without a period situation. So the run up to my 40s was very hormonally, like a lot of hormonal changes, which again, at that time, I had no language for. Nobody talked to me about perimenopause. Nobody talked to me about anything. So it was just like, okay, I'm feeling a certain way. My kids were getting a little bit older. My ex-husband and I started having different conversations, and I realized this is not how I want to spend the rest of my life. And I don't want to model this kind of behavior for my kids. Then I was looking at then I was looking at career changes and job changes. So I think the way I'd frame it is, for me and for a lot of us, the 40s became the decade of a lot of change. And it wasn't like you had the luxury of one slice, right? You
Right?
had all of this stuff happening, and then the hormonal changes almost makes it almost like lifts the veil, to your point, because we begin to see things differently. And whether it's because our tolerance is changing with the hormonal shifts, or we're starting to look at, hey, I've got 2, 3, 4 decades maybe left, is this the way I want to live it? And then you start compiling, hey, if I'm going to make some of these changes, now's a good time to do it because I want to reap the benefits of them. And then some of us have kids, then some of us have aging parents, and so we're starting to see that lens a little bit differently. And the other thing I think for me too was, not that my 40s I had the luxury of like copious amounts of time, because I didn't, but I started to have a little bit more quiet space where I started to ask myself, like, see things differently and start to ask myself, like, is this the way I want to live the rest of my life? And the answer to a lot of it was no.
And when
So
my
yeah.
children, when we empty nested, when they started moving out, going off to college and moving out, what I noticed was how much disposable income I had. I didn't realize. I did not realize. And
Yeah.
that changed the equation as well, because if
Yeah.
I only had me to look out for and not me and all of his 100 hobbies,
Right.
that could make a big shift in lifestyle as well.
Yeah. I mean, all of these things, at least for myself, I just started to look at things differently. The circumstances were changing a little bit. The kids were getting a little bit older. My job was very secure. I started looking at opportunities to tick off some bucket list items from a career standpoint. Made the change to divorce, made that decision. Needed to kind of acquaint myself with myself, because turned out I didn't know a lot about myself, or some of the best parts of me I had kind of edited out for a lot of time, a lot of years. And so I kind of needed to reintroduce myself. And then, I was adjusting to life as a single mom, and not that I was like an entire, 100% single mom, but I'm raising these boys 50, 60% of the time on my own. That felt different. I needed to keep them situated. So it was just like all these things were sort of hitting me at once. But and for me, it wasn't a single moment. The light bulb, the light switch didn't just happen, but it was a series of things that were happening. And then my perspective on all of these things began to change. And that was kind of how I experienced my 40s. And then going into my 50s, there was just a mindset shift. And it had been building in my 40s, and then it kind of solidified in my 50s, if that made sense. And then I embraced it more.
Okay.
I didn't
And
fight
when
it.
did you decide to use your voice to inform other women?
So this is a really good question. So when I was 35, I had a book idea, and it was going to be called The Real Girl's Guide to Over 35, because that's the point in which I was really struggling. I was at a turning point. I was at this inflection point. I hit 35. I had two boys at that time. I was in a marriage that I was pretty sure was probably not going to go the distance, if I was really honest with myself. I had my first career pivot that I was really looking at. I started to notice like subtle, like not like tragic appearance changes, but things were starting to shift a little bit. And unbeknownst to me, I was actually entering perimenopause. I didn't know that at 35. So my experience was a lot different. And I was looking around and I was like, everybody seems to have everything together. So it must just be me. So I started jotting down these ideas for a book. And I put everything into a red folder, like a literal, remember those like file folders? Literal red folder. And I thought I'm going to write this book. And then I realized, like, who am I to think I can write a book at 35? And I have no time. Like, I was deep in it, right? I was deep in all this stuff. The kids were still small at that time, and had a third one that I didn't know was just a couple years, a few years past making his arrival, and, you know, all these things. But so the file folder got buried, like literally on my desk. I had a really small pile, and the folder was in the pile. So fast forward 20 years, lots of things happened in that 20 years. I retired. I met a man in my late 40s, early 50s after my divorce. He lives 8,000 miles away from me. So he lives in Australia. I live in the US. So we built this really amazing partnership, working across two continents. And he sold a business. And in December of 24, he's like, guess what? You get to retire. And there was a little bit of resistance on my part because that meant a shift in the financial situation. You know, I worked my whole life since I was 14, but I gladly accepted the opportunity. And I was cleaning out my desk and I found the folder and I opened the folder and I was like, well, look at that. Turns out a lot of the things that I thought I was struggling with, I kind of worked through. And the bigger, aha was I have a whole new set of things that I just don't know what the hell is happening with. And so I gave myself 2 months, and a lot of the same still self-talk, like, who am I to think I could write a book? I'm not an author. Nobody's going to want to buy this book. But the good news, instead of wallowing in that for months and months and years and doing nothing, it was a couple months. And instead of who am I to think or this is impossible, the question became, why not me? Why not this book? Why not write it? And so that's what I did. So I started it in like March of 25, and yeah, and I was like, well, why the hell not?
Uh-huh. I love that story. And I love that story because that folder that you buried at 20 years before was right where you left it.
It was
And you didn't go
right where I
looking
left it.
for it because you forgot about it, but it came up right when the window of opportunity was there. Now you had the time, now you had the resources, now you had the perspective to do it differently. Have you ever heard that story about Rip Van Winkle? Do you ever remember that old story?
I know the story, but I don't. I mean, I remember the story, but I don't remember the details.
I know enough about it to use it for this moment. And
Okay,
that is
good, good.
that it was, the guy goes and decides to take a nap under a tree and falls asleep and then wakes up. And when they wake up, the landscape is completely different from
I
what they remembered.
remember.
They had been
Yes.
sleeping for 20 years.
Yeah.
When I woke up, it was between 40 and 60. I took all the things I was doing before 40 self-developmentally because I had the hormones and I had the traumas and I had all the stuff. And I just shelved all of my do-gooder, good girl efforts for other people and stayed out of churches and stayed out of self-help and stayed out of all of that. And when I woke up at 60 and said, I feel like Rip Van Winkle. It's like I just woke up and the world changed when I wasn't looking.
Yeah.
And I have been sitting on this treasure chest for 20 years. I knew then what I have lived now, which puts a whole different tenor to the book and the story and the telling of it.
Yes.
And I think why I'm so fascinated with authors like you and with writers on Substack who are doing this, first of all, is that they're daring to go deeper than a marketing model of hook, line, and sinker, right? And to be just all of who you are. And the more that I do that, even in this last year, my voice has gotten stronger and
Yes.
bolder and more certain with the telling, even with the mean girls, even with the haters, even with the
Yeah.
misogynists, even
Yeah.
all of it.
It's so
And I don't
true.
look at the numbers
No, me
anymore.
neither. Me neither. And
Yeah.
it's so funny that you say that. So a really good example that I can give you in much the same way. So, again, what prompted the book idea in my 30s was all of these questions, all these things that I was feeling, and I was looking around, and everybody just looked so shiny and perfect. And I thought, okay, so the problem must be me. So fast forward, right? I'm starting to write this book. I don't have a ton of friends, but I have a group of girlfriends that many of whom we met in elementary school and we're still close. And I think about the conversations that we had during those 20 years. They were not the kind of conversations we started having and continue to have now that I've written this book. So it was almost like I started talking about these things, right? And my circle, even just my immediate circle, all of a sudden, people are starting to talk a little bit more. And they're reflecting back and going, well, when you thought like everything was so great 20 years ago, here's what was really happening. Or, hey, I'm kind of dealing with some menopause symptoms now, like, can we talk about those? So it was like I was just so free about sharing stuff. And then my friends, and that's where I noticed it immediately. It was like all of a sudden the conversations were just shifting and people were reflecting differently, and we were having different conversations in the moment. And once that started happening, it was like this network effect. And then the community just started building, and these conversations were happening, and there was no shame and there was no
Yeah.
like embarrassment. It was like, hey, this thing is happening and I don't know why. And so I am very, to your point, like, yeah, people are always, I get this question a lot. I get the, how, how are your boys not embarrassed by what you write? And I always answer that with is, well, if they are, like, we'll talk about it, but why would I not write? I'm a whole person. I'm not just their mom. And am I gonna introduce my 15, 16-year-old to a chapter in my book where I talk about sex? No, I'm not gonna encourage him to read that. But if at some point he reads that later in life, okay, so we'll talk about it, and he can thank me later because it'll be giving him a perspective that I think sometime in his life he will reflect back on and appreciate. So, no, I'm not embarrassed. No, I'm not shameful. No, I'm not any of those things. And, the other way I answer that is if any of these topics make you uncomfortable, do me a favor. Don't read them. Don't engage.
Good.
Like, I'm not going to soften what I'm saying to make you feel comfortable, but I gladly invite you to no longer engage with them. Like, really, and I have no, like, I feel very confident in that. Where if I go back to my 20s and 30s and probably even my early 40s, I would have taken all that on and then taken that stick and beat myself with it to kind of say, what are you thinking? And you're hurting all these people and everybody's suffering by you writing and talking about these things. Like, you need to stop. Nah, I don't think that anymore.
And I love that, but I'm out. Just last night was on a call, and the amount of guilt that women over 50, over 60 are still carrying from the being a good mom girl,
Oh, yeah.
okay, as their adult children are aging out and making new decisions about their value, worth, or
Mm-hmm.
background. And I got through my area of that by deconstructing the beliefs that underlied it wasn't good enough to be just good enough. You had
Yeah.
to be perfect or it was worthless. You had to
Yeah.
do it right every time. And if the children have one bad memory, somehow that fell on my shoulders.
Right.
Never mind that there were two of us parenting.
Right.
So I had to deconstruct, but my deconstruction meant deconstructing the things I learned at home, the things I
Yep.
learned in church, the things I learned from business, the things I learned from my girlfriend circles,
Yeah. Yeah.
and really, uh, and do you talk about deconstruction? Not that word, people get
Yeah.
confused by it,
Yeah.
but
I
the
think so.
rethinking of what
Yeah,
your values are.
it's kind of reframing it, right? And also, understanding that It's okay. So there's two ways I would answer that question. So I talk a lot and very openly in the book about some of the situations that I wasn't proud of, the way I showed up for my kids when we were going through so many changes, and I was dealing with hormones and didn't know what was happening. And at a time when my kids needed me to be calm for them, I probably created more storms than I wish I would have. And I could see that honestly, and that's my job to make amends. Now their experience of that is not the same as mine. I carry it a lot more deeply than they do, but it's something I'm not proud of because I didn't know what was happening for me. So that's one way. And I write a lot about that. And so a lot of it, and it is that deconstruction, right? It's the opening up of things and starting to reframe them and put rationale, like actual rationale and explanation to what was happening in those moments. Then I think we have to move to acknowledging whether it was, how was I feeling in those moments? To then, forgiving ourselves and showing ourselves a little bit of grace. And then when you do those things, I believe you move out of that spiral of shame and fear and guilt and disappointment in ourselves. If we can accept, acknowledge it and address it, we can move to acceptance. And it's like that change. So that decomposition that I write about is, I think it's a series of things, right? It's, to your point, you have to kind of put a lens, you kind of have to evaluate what was happening in those moments, put a lens onto why maybe those things were happening, address what the feeling is that you're feeling and accept, acknowledge that, because a lot of us don't like to acknowledge like how we're feeling because we just want to gloss over it. Give ourselves just a tiny bit of grace, and a perspective based on where we sit today. And then I think you can move to acceptance. And then once you kind of move through this cycle, we get to a new plane of being able to see whatever's happening in front of us. But if we skirt any of those steps, or to your point, don't do the deconstruction, it's very hard to lift out of it, I believe, because you sit in it.
And I see a lot of times women get stuck in the, yes, I accept that that's what it was, but they still blame other people for bearing the harm that was caused by that. So that amends process.
Yeah, it is. It's an amends process. Yes.
Absolutely. And it's ongoing amends. It means amends means it's not remorse. It's, I can't remember the word, starts with an R. Welcome to my world. But it is the part that says, I'm sorry that happened. How can I make it right? Rather than
right?
you should feel, no, here's how I feel. Here's what I did wrong. Here's how I would have done it differently. And I intended to move differently in the future with you.
Yeah.
And then enter a dialogue, an adult to adult dialogue, please.
Yeah,
of what that means. Do you have a way to move women through that amends part of taking responsibility for even what we didn't know at the time?
Yeah.
It's not enough to say, I did the best I could with what I had to work with, get over it.
No. And I do, there's parts of the book where I talk about, especially, and also in the workbook, the way I've kind of constructed the workbook is there's little opportunities to ask ourselves questions, to reframe things in a new lens, to practice reflecting, thoughts and behaviors, and then, commitments that we can make to ourselves to making small steps and taking small action. This is going to be so silly. Again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist, nothing. But there's this pattern that I started with myself, probably toward the end of my kind of full-time working, but also through the process of writing, of saying the thing I need out loud. So it could be very simple. If I'm sitting at this desk, right, and I'm tired and I go, I need a nap, right? I can think it all day long. But if I just sit in this space and I think it, I'll never do it, because the next set of thoughts are, who am I to think I could take a nap? Like, who do you think you are? Look at your to-do list. Naps are a luxury. You're not going to, you don't know how to nap. You're not going to take, I can talk myself out of it. But the minute I say it out loud, even in this empty room to myself, I'm tired. That's how I'm feeling. I need a nap, or I need a break. When I say those things out loud, it changes my thought pattern. And when I change my thought pattern, my actions change. So there are days where if you heard me, if I had a microphone, how many things I say out loud, like, I need a break. And that saying it out loud to myself gets me up and gets me walking. It could be to another room. It could be to go sit out on the porch. It's not like this big, I'm not blowing up my life by saying the thing I need out loud, saying the thing I feel out loud. It is just creating a new behavior. It's giving me the prompt to take an action. And so that's kind of another powerful process, right? Where we give ourselves time to reflect, give ourselves the ability to answer a question, to reframe a thought, to say something out loud, and then to make a small change. And I think that that's where, if I go back and I look at some of the times in my life where things felt the most overwhelming to me, it's because I held a belief that I had to have everything perfectly planned, that I had to account for any, possible scenario, that I had to be fully prepared, and that I had to own the outcome for everybody involved.
Ooh.
And I didn't. I didn't then, and I don't now. And that mindset, though, kept me locked into things. It made me very tolerant of situations that, had I reframed earlier, I wouldn't have been so tolerant about, because I felt like I had to have the perfect plan, and I had to have a solution for everybody impacted, and I had to be prepared. And it's like, and also, like, it just felt like I had to do like these big life changes. And it's like, I actually probably didn't. And so the way I kind of talk about this is, I don't, I look at all these reframes and this, radical self-possession mindset, and I don't believe it's about blowing up your whole life, but it is about taking an inventory of the things
Ah,
that are happening in your life, the things that you want, the things that you want to release, the person that you want to be, the things that you want to start, and then making a plan to take some small step. And maybe that plan is just to write some of that stuff down. That's a
right,
step.
right. There is such power in our own voice. It's
Mm,
power when we speak life into somebody else. We can speak death or life, depending on
yes,
what's
we
coming out of
can.
our mouth. And so there's power in that. But the things we say to ourselves, that internal conversation before we speak it out our mouth that says, I need a nap, is
Yeah.
the one that, where I call it the committee, the itty bitty
Yeah.
shitty committee. And
Yes.
and it's just in there running rampant, because part of my old conditioning is, are you sure? Are you sure you really? I used to do that with going to the bathroom in corporate
Yeah.
America. It
Yeah.
was like I would wait until the last possible second
Second. Yeah.
before going. And when I started learning intuitive eating, Evelyn Tribole said to me, it's like intuitive peeing. You don't debate with your body about what it needs to do. You feel the urge, you go, you take care of business, and you get back to what you were doing.
Yeah.
And I thought, I never do that. And I
Uh-huh.
never did that with my hunger either, because
Right.
listening to my body was foreign to me, because I had
Yeah.
been trained early on, hustle culture, a
Uh,
large part of it, right? So
yeah.
in retirement or post-retirement or pre-retirement, wherever you are in this world, how how hard do those old hustle culture habits still try to deregulate your day?
Mm. It's a good question, because I do think that they still do, because if I'm honest with you, I'm not perfect, right? There are still situations that come up, and my default lens to see or evaluate something is not like this new and evolved Angela all the time. Sometimes my default lens is kind of, takes me back a little bit, but I think what's different now is I can spot it. I can short circuit it. And then I can start asking questions like, okay, just because I can doesn't mean I should. Just because I can do this thing because I'm used to it, I can handle it. I've got, I competency was my currency. I want to be viewed as the competent one. Just because I can doesn't mean I should. And just because I can doesn't mean I want to. And what I've also learned is, no is a full sentence. The world does not open up and swallow you and the people that you care about whole when you say no. So another behavior change that I have become very, very comfortable with is this idea. So this kind of hustle culture, I have to say yes to everything. God forbid I said no to something. I couldn't just say no. Okay. I would have to produce a dissertation to
Yes.
explain why I was saying no. So
Right.
instead if this is a challenge where you start like something, and the inventory that precipitates, or what's that word? Talk about menopause. The inventory step that comes before that is, am I saying, like, why am I tired all the time? Am I saying yes to things that I actually don't want to do? Like, stop and just pause and do that little inventory. And then, like, if saying no is uncomfortable, as an example, I'm not available. That's 3 words. I don't owe anybody an explanation. I don't owe anybody a dissertation. So take these small things that are happening in life, right? And to your point, the hustle. When you start saying yes to things, or you're taking on these things just because you can, just because I can doesn't mean I should, doesn't mean I want to. And how am I feeling as a result? If I'm tired and I'm angry and I'm saying yes to things, and the next thought is, ugh, why did I just say yes to that thing? Reframe it. It's okay to say no. The world's not going to open up and swallow you whole. People will survive. And if no feels uncomfortable, I'm not available. That's 3 words.
So when I talk to women in our age group who carry guilt about saying no still, or shame after the fact,
Right.
okay, even because even if they don't do the dissertation, it's still running in their head.
Yeah.
Then the question is, who taught you? Who taught you how to say no? When did that happen? And what have you taught your children about their power of no?
Yeah. That's a very good question. I think, it wasn't like it was one lesson about saying no, right? I think it started out of decades of me being the good girl, the competent one, the one that everybody relied on, and me taking on these roles and these jobs that I never asked for. I got a lot of promotions, right? If I think about like my personal, my my role in my family, my role at work, like I took on a lot of roles that I didn't even interview for. Like I just took them on because I was competent, because I was the trusted one, because people relied on me, and I liked that. I got something out of it. But it wasn't until I think I got into my 30s and 40s and I started to realize that I have just a finite amount of time and a finite amount of energy. And I needed to be a lot more selective, because I was a single mom, because I was trying to forge this new life as a divorced woman, and because I was trying to do all these things, I had to be a little bit more selective. So it was kind of this slow burn of, well, wait a second, I'm tired all the time. Maybe one of the things I need to stop doing is saying yes to everything, because I can't get more sleep. I need to preserve my energy. So I wish I could say it was one lesson or one moment or one teacher, but I think it was a series of experiences where I started to just look at things differently. And even the practice of saying no, like I didn't come out the gate going, I'm just going to start saying no and no and no, and everybody's going to love it. I had to practice. And yes, that feeling afterward, even still, I'm not perfect. I'll say like I'm not available, and then I'm like, oh, should I have just gone to that thing? And I was like, no, I feel good about it. So that's kind of one way. But the way I sort of frame this for my boys is again, I've got a lot of these little mantras. That's what my boys call them. One of them is, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And so be protective. Be bold. If there's something that is happening in your circle, somebody's asking you to do something that doesn't feel right to you, say no. And don't look back. So I hope that I'm giving them a perspective that it took me decades to sort of get to and unwind and decouple from who I viewed myself as. I think what I've done with my boys is to kind of maybe not create that deep association between the things I say yes to, the things I say no to, and those being my sole identity.
Right.
And
measuring
again,
up to other people's expectations.
And measuring up to other people's expectations, and carrying that measurement stick against yourself. Like, leave the stick at the door, dudes. And that's kind of what I say. Like, yeah, you could be super critical, and I love that. Be evaluate, be introspective, be thoughtful, be inquisitive about what you do and how you show up for yourself and the people that you love. Be all those things, but lose the stick. Don't beat yourself with it, and don't measure yourself against anybody else, including me. Don't measure yourself against me. I am not a good yardstick for y'all. So I think a lot of it is just, in in what I say, in how I live, in the decisions that I make. One of the other mantras, though, is I tell the kids all the time, if you're going to take a risk in life, always bet on yourself. I have to be able to model that. I can't just say the words to them. I have to show them. So a lot of how I hope that my kids are getting this message is just not through my words, but they're seeing and they've watched me change. And now that a couple of them are in their 20s, they're not fully mature enough to understand the depth and the nuances of the changes and the evolution that I've gone through. They will, but they've seen enough. And I've got the 15-year-old going, "You're so much more fun now." And I'm like, "Well, you're welcome." Yeah, I do feel like I'm more fun now. So it's like, so I feel like it's a very long-winded answer. And I wish that I had a very succinct, it was this person, this lesson, and this kind of teaching to my kids. But I think it's a combination of doing that deconstruction, being very present and understanding what's happening for us in the moment, starting to become comfortable with saying the things that we want and then acting in ways that we want, and then modeling that for the people that we love the most. They may not get it immediately, but our actions do matter, I think, especially to our kids.
Well, and our children are always watching until the day you die.
Yeah,
They
they
are
are.
always watching. So you
Always.
always have opportunity to model a next stage, a next step, a next something, how to move with grace and commitment and clarity in
Yeah, and
spite of or in
also
face of.
and also how to recover from missteps. That's the other thing, right? Like, life is not always easy. And so, you were reflecting on the conversation you were a part of where, women can hold a lot of guilt about things that we should have done, or, the, the choices that our kids are now making or will make in the future. And how do we decouple, carrying the burden and the responsibility for those? And a lot of it is also in kind of that reflection. And how do I reframe it? How do I reflect? And more importantly, how do I recover? And how are my kids seeing me recover? Because I make mistakes all the time. um, you know and part of my lesson to my boys is also, how do we recover from those?
And in any of the work that you've done, Angela, have you looked at the systems that were put
Mm.
in place around us that fueled and fed and sustained the good girl instead of the wise woman?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
And a lot of that comes out in the Real Girl's Guide to Midlife through my story and other women's stories, because there are the systems. The systems are absolutely put in place, whether they're family systems, whether they're systems at work, that almost reward us, that encourage us, that keep us in this good girl, people pleasing, quiet, small, easily malleable, guilty place. They're there. And then I think, in the way I look at it, and this could be maybe controversial, I don't view that as being, kind of an outside in problem where we can look at that and go, okay, the systems are to blame entirely. They shape us for sure. And they condition us, and how we show up inside the systems
yes,
perpetuates a lot of this stuff, until it doesn't, until we start to look at that and go, wait a second. And maybe it's hormonal, right? The hormones start to leave the building, your tolerance shifts, you start to see the world a little bit differently. So I sort of view it as like, yep, those systems are absolutely there. And you can see those patterns repeated through
right.
many of the stories in the book. And we all experience that. And there is a responsibility that we have to ourselves to sort of evaluate what those systems are and begin to take control if we want to. And all of those things are a choice for the most part. How are we gonna continue, to accept some of the roles or the systems or the beliefs or the modeling that, those around us and our environments, have cultivated and perpetuate, versus, are we gonna live in that and participate, or are we going to, participate in a different way? So I sort of see it as being, um, you know environmental and systems based, but also how do we show up um, how do we show up in that? And I don't know.
Well,
Do you? I would love to hear your perspective on that. Actually.
I'm reflecting as you're talking because I think about go back to Mean Girls again,
Yeah. Yeah.
because the Mean Girls in my younger life showed up around my body, my
Mm,
weight, my competition for boys, my visibility, my image, right?
mm-hmm.
On the internet.
Yeah.
It is the highlight reel. But postmenopause, the mean girls show up when I name the system that they're still trying to protect.
Mm,
Oh, see, now it's kind of like when you get a divorce, and I got
interesting.
divorced
Yeah.
in the church, which, oh my God, how dare you?
Right.
And and those women that were my friends, suddenly I was not invited because they were afraid that I was a new threat to the fidelity of their marriage or their husband.
Interesting.
Or and women, that's not uncommon for women to
No.
experience that, particularly when you are a healthy, vital 40 something in
Right.
the realm and they've been married 18 years to this person, right?
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
so mean girls come out then, but but they come out because they are trying to protect one of those systems that they
Uh-huh.
still are hanging on to for their identity. And that's why the
Yes.
difference is that the lens I see it through now, then as a younger woman, I thought it was about me. And I actually gained weight so that women wouldn't feel threatened, so that I could
Right.
work with their men in anger management groups or whatever.
Oh my
And
gosh.
now I see it and I go, oh, I'm sorry that my freedom threatens you.
Yeah.
And like you said, you don't have to read that chapter. You
No.
don't have to like that book, but
Mm-hmm.
I am past the point of dumbing down so that
Totally.
anybody feels comfortable. And if I don't let the men off the hook in my world, why would I make myself smaller so that the women aren't mean to me?
It's so there's a couple things that come to mind there. Number one, if I reflect back, I do think that there were some friendships when I divorced that and women who kind of pulled away. And the framing that I always gave it was like I thought that they felt that divorce was contagious. So somehow if I was left in the circle that all of a sudden it threatened the sanctity of their marriage. Not necessarily that I was a threat, but like the idea of you can divorce and be healthy and successful and vibrant and whatever threaten them. So I think about that, but I also think about some of the interactions and the women in my life who I have created a lot of distance from, um, because the way that they would interact with me was very critical of me, and I carried with that a perspective that said I must be flawed, like I am, how am I presenting and showing up that this person have this view? So I took that on as my responsibility. And it wasn't until I can look at that objectively and go, that says nothing about me. It's everything about you. Um, and your behavior toward me, your actions toward me, your words with me, the way you move when you're around me, that's not me. That's all you. And I'm not going to participate in your insecurity, in your jealousy, in your unhappiness. I am not going to show up for that. And I am not going to participate. So it made it actually that framing for me as an adult in my 40s and 50s made it very easy to sort of weed out my circle. And it made it very easy to look at certain individuals and go, yeah, nah, that's a big no. I'm not going to be around that. I don't need that. And I feel zero guilt about it. Zero.
And that framing will hold if you ever find yourself in a position of estrangement with any of your adult children.
Yeah.
That positioning is what people have to go through 4 or 5 or 6 years of doing it wrong to get
Mm.
to say, this is not about me.
This isn't about
This
me.
is
and
not
I, and
about
I think
you.
it becomes harder when it is your kids, right? because
Yeah.
because of the system of motherhood, right? Like we are, and if you think about it, we keep these kids alive for like that is our main job, and it shifts. That job shifts, and it nobody tells us how to do it. I think that parenting adult kids and that transition is one of the hardest things I've ever been through. And like, where's the book about that? Where's the book? Because I don't know how to do it. And then when you have more than one kid, and lo and behold, those kids grow into different humans and different adults. Now what? It's like I'm an alien in foreign territory and I don't know what to do. So it is very hard, but it is a perspective. And
Yes.
when you can gain it through relationships that maybe feel less valuable, um, you can
Yes.
begin to apply principles, maybe not the whole thing, but begin to apply principles to those relationships that matter deeply. But man, it has been liberating. And I can picture in my head some women in my life where, and I'll get told all the time, like, oh, you need to forge a relationship with her, or you need to be more. No, I don't. Why? No, I don't. No, I don't. I'm good. I'm good.
Angela, you are good,
Thank
but
you.
not in
And
the
so are
good
you.
girl kind of way.
Yeah. Thank you. So are you.
Um, I want to just, we're getting ready to wrap. I just want to hear, how do people find you? Where can they find your book? How do they work with you? What are your largely are? And is there any parting thoughts you'd like to leave for our guests? Our guests are women over 40 who are in the messy middle.
Yeah, the messy middle is real. I'd say, you're not crazy. You're not alone. You're not the problem. And, again, I don't believe that making meaningful, substantial changes necessarily means you have to blow up your whole life. But just give yourself, in my book, there's a chapter, it's the manifesto. And there's a series of prompts. And if you do nothing else, get the Real Girl's Guide to Midlife, do that exercise. It's the last chapter, and give yourself the time and space and start asking some questions. And even that is taking a very important step towards something different. So I'd leave all of us women with that and the courage to just be bold and be real and be vulnerable, because you never know what you're going to get back in return. So that would be that. And where you can find me, I'm on Substack, realgirlsguidetomidlife.com. You can find me on Instagram, which is so uncomfortable for me, but yes, I am there, Real Girls Guide 55. And my book is available on Amazon or on my website, realgirlsguide.com.
All right, Angela, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate you. I will be seeing you on Substack some more.
Yes, you will.
And I'll let you know when this is all going to drop.
Can't wait.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.